The world was white and humming. Wind came knifing along the high ridge, carving sharp lines into the drifted snow and lifting a fine glitter of ice crystals into the air. The peaks on the horizon looked close enough to touch, their jagged silhouettes hard against a washed-out blue sky. Far below, the valley lay like a shallow cut through the mountains, its floor pocked with fresh craters that still smoked in the cold. The thunder of the tank's main gun rolled up the slope a heartbeat after the flash. The shell struck low on the ridge, a bloom of snow and rock erupting 30 meters downslope from where Corporal Reyes lay pressed into the shelter of a jagged outcrop. Clods of snow and chips of stone arced over her, pattering against her helmet and webbing. She felt the impact through her ribs more than heard it, a deep animal thump that rattled her teeth. She gritted her jaw, pressed her cheek tighter against the stock of a rifle, and blinked the frost from her lashes. Her breath fogged the cracked glass of her scope, so she forced herself to exhale slowly, nose angled away from the optic. The reticle steadied. Focus. Breathe. Front sight, not the fay. Below, the tank ground steadily through the snow, a dark, hulking shape in a landscape of blinding white. Its turret swept in a slow, predatory arc, coaxial machine gun lashing stitching lines of traces across the slope where her squad had been minutes before. Bodies lay scattered, dark smears on the pristine hillside. A boot here, an arm there, a whole form unnaturally still in a widening halo of crimson that looked too bright against the snow. The tank's tracks churned ice and powder into a dirty spray. Its engine idled with a rhythmic growl she could feel through her chest, even at this distance. Every few seconds, the main gun depressed, searching, hunting for any sign of movement. Not yet, she told herself. Not the tank. Not while it still owns the valley. She lifted her head just enough to tuck the radio earpiece tighter into her ear, thumb pressing the push-to-talk switch on the battered hand MIC clipped to her vest. Viking 2. This is Bravo Marksman. Do you copy? Break. Any station this net. This is Bravo Marksman on ridge above the valley. Respond. Over. Nothing. Just the faint hiss of static, like distant surf. She switched channels with gloved fingers that had gone stiff from the cold and adrenaline. Another call. Another click. Another empty carrier wave. Come on, she whispered. Somebody answer. When the ambush had started, her ear had been full of voices. Her lieutenant shouting contact, the radio operator calling in grids, command firing back questions, overlapping, chaotic. Then the hiss had thickened, the noise on the line turning into a warbling, unnatural interference. Now there was only this, a hollow, unbroken noise, like the whole world had gone underwater. She let the MIC fall back against her chest and flattened herself again, heart thudding too hard and too fast. They knew we were coming. The thought wasn't new. It had been playing in her head since the first mortar landed exactly where it needed to. But here, alone on the ridge, it landed differently. It felt heavier, more final. Another memory hit her in fast, disjointed flashes, quick as the artillery burst that had chased them into cover. Sergeant Cover's voice, raw with urgency. Fall back. Get off the road. Reyes, re-security, now. Parker, the machine gunner, yelling over his shoulder that he was hit, blood blossoming over the front of his plate carrier as he tried to keep his weapon in the fight. The radio operator, Phelan, hunched over the headset askew, yelling, Viking Actual, this is, before his words dissolved into broken noise and an ugly, rising hum. And over all of it, a final, garbled transmission from some distant station, breaking through the interference for 2.5 seconds. Jammer, they knew you were. Get out of the... before the line went dead. Reyes squeezed her eyes shut for a heartbeat, forcing those images back into the corner of her mind where she couldn't afford to look at them now. When she opened them, the tank was closer. She slid one hand off the rifle and felt along the snow to her right, fingers brushing the cold metal of her magazines. 4 standard mags, their dull bodies dusted with ice. And one more, the 5th, marked with a strip of red tape around its base. Her fingertips hovered over that one, pressing lightly against the tape, feeling its ridged texture through the thin fabric of her glove. For a moment, She just rested there, like her hand on a pulse. Not yet. She pulled her hand away and checked the others first, counting rounds in her head, remembering how many times she'd reloaded, how many bursts she'd fired at muzzle flashes and silhouettes on the ridgelines. Too much. She'd shot too much. But if she hadn't, more of them would already be dead. Below, the tank's engine note changed as it slowed to a stop. The turret rotated with mechanical calm, tracking up toward her side of the ridge, but not yet locked onto her exact position. Not yet. Through the scope, she watched the rear hatch grind open. Figures in white and gray winter gear spilled out, rifles slung, moving with a quick, purposeful gait of infantry who knew they owned the ground. They fanned out, boots sinking into the churned snow, one of them pausing to gesture up at the ridgeline. Is he pointing at me? She adjusted the focus, zooming in. The man's hand cut the air in a short, sharp motion toward the slope. Another soldier nodded, turned, and knelt beside a pack he'd set down. Something small and skeletal rose out of it, rotors unfolding with insect precision. A quadcopter drone, matte gray, barely larger than a dinner plate. Its lights blinked to life. Shit, Reyes whispered. The rotors spun up, a high, waspish whine that the wind tried and failed to carry away. The drone lifted, wobbled, then steadied and turned, nose tilting toward the ridge. Toward her. She dragged the rifle a few inches, letting the sling take some of the weight, and lined up the scope on the tiny machine as it began to climb. Its delicate frame seemed wildly out of place in this landscape of steel and stone, and yet it was the most dangerous thing in the sky right now. Eyes for the tank, correction for the mortars, a hunter that didn't get tired. If she shot it, they'd know where she was instantly. The tank would have a mark. The infantry would swarm. But if she let it keep coming, it would find her anyway, and then they'd have more than her muzzle flash to work with. Choice made, she thought. You already made it the moment you squeezed off that shot at the first drone. Still, her finger didn't quite settle on the trigger. She hesitated, because in the far edge of her scope, below the drone and beside the tank, something else caught her eye. It was nothing, at first glance. Just snow. A gentle depression in the powder, an oval where the surface seemed to sag slightly. Easily missed. But to her, from this height, with a brain that catalogued terrain automatically now, it tugged at her attention like a hand on her sleeve. She shifted the rifle, pulled away from the drone for a second, and dialed the magnification down to widen her field of view. The depression sat right beside the tank's starboard track, just forward of the second road wheel. Clean, neat, like the snow had settled over something boxy and regular lying beneath. Her heart gave a single, sharp beat. The bend. The mine. She saw it all at once, not as a memory, but as overlapping transparencies in her mind. The narrow choke point on the valley route. The way she'd knelt in the cold that morning, placing a directional mine just so, angling it toward where an armored hull might one day pass. The thin, careful layer of snow she'd brushed back over it. The mental note she'd stored away, the way other people stored birthdays and anniversaries. Maybe, just maybe, that one small act of paranoia was about to be the only card she had left. The drone buzzed closer, wobbling on the wind, its lens and sensors sweeping. In her scope it grew, frame becoming distinct, rotors a blur. Her finger tightened on the trigger, then eased, then tightened again. Drone or snow. Eyes in the sky, or teeth in the ground. One shot, she thought. That's all you've got that still matters. Her breathing slowed, the chaos of the valley narrowing to the soft rush of air in and out of her lungs, the faint rasp of fabric where her cheek met the stock. Her hands trembled from cold and adrenaline, but her sight picture was rock steady, the reticle hovering between the drone and that sunken patch of snow like a crossroad. If she took the drone first, she might buy seconds for the remaining wounded below. If she gambled on the snow, on the buried shape she knew was there, she might end the hunt entirely, or do nothing at all, just waste a precious round. The wind gusted, tugging at her hood. It carried up faint shouts from the valley, enemy voices, barking orders in a language she barely understood but had learned to read in posture and tone. Urgency, frustration, focus. She shifted the rifle again, back toward the tank, toward the innocuous oval of snow that only she seemed to see. Her fingers settled, this time, firm on the trigger. No more hesitation. One shot can still change everything. She exhaled, slow and steady, took up the slack. The world snapped to black on the imagined cut, leaving only the echo of a single rifle crack rolling across the valley. And over that echo, in the space where a narrator's voice would sit if this were a story told on a screen rather than lived in blood and ice, another line formed. This is how the quietest soldier in the platoon became the last one left on the ridge, and how her rifle did what no one thought possible. The morning had started with coffee that tasted like burnt mud and the lazy confidence of a mission brief everyone thought would be easy. The forward operating base squatted at the edge of the mountains like an ugly stain of steel and plywood on the pristine snow. Generators hummed fitfully, breathing diesel into the cold air. Somewhere in the motor pool, someone cursed at a reluctant engine. The flag over the command shack snapped in a wind that never really stopped. Reyes stepped out of the tent she shared with 3 other women, breath clouding in front of her, and flexed her fingers against the chill. The world was a palette of off-whites and dull greens, interrupted by the orange glow of heaters and the dull tan of blast walls. The sky was just beginning to brighten, the edges of the mountains painted in thin gold. She adjusted the strap of her rifle and walked toward the briefing room, boots crunching in the slush that never fully froze near the heart of the base. Around her, the base was waking up, a pair of engineers lugging a toolbox toward the comms hut, a medic hauling a crate of supplies, a cook smoking outside the mess before starting breakfast. Inside the briefing room, a map of the valley was projected onto a whiteboard. Lines and symbols marked routes and danger areas, though most of the marks were old, leftovers from previous rotations, previous missions. The room smelled of marker ink, damp uniforms, and coffee. Lieutenant Marsh stood at the front, pointing with a capped pen as a small cluster of soldiers gathered around. On the map, a narrow valley snaked between 2 steep ridgelines, leading up toward a small icon on a high spur, the relay site. Simple run, Marsh was saying as Reyes slid into place at the edge of the group. We escort the maintenance team up to the ridge. They swap the batteries, pull the data off the recorder. We hike back. If we move on schedule, we're back here drinking hot chocolate before the afternoon front moves in. Any questions? There were a few, about load plans, about whether they were taking sleds or loading the gear on their backs, about if they could count on a bird for extraction if the weather turned early. Marsh answered each with the easy confidence of someone who'd done similar patrols and survived them. Reyes stood silently, eyes flicking between the map and the faces of his squad mates. Sergeant Kova, solid and tired-looking, arms crossed. Parker, the machine gunner, leaning on his weapon with that restless energy he carried everywhere. Phelan, the radio operator, scribbling notes beside the radio frequencies listed on the side of the board. The tech, Owens, standing close to the lieutenant and the map, hands jammed in his pockets. And our designated marksman, Marsh said, nodding in Reyes' direction. Corporal Reyes will set up an overwatch position on the ridgeline above the site while we're on station. Standard drill. You see anything weird, you sing out and put rounds where they need to go. A couple of heads turned toward her. Reyes gave a small nod and said nothing. She didn't need to. She'd earned the slot the hard way. Hours on the range, endless dry-firing sessions in the dark, the quiet stubbornness that came from needing something she could point to and say, I'm good at this. And it matters. That didn't mean anyone flocked to her in the tent at night, though. Reyes was the quiet one on the edges of the card games, the one who remembered everyone's preferred zero on their optics but forgot basic gossip, the one who cleaned her rifle when others lounged and scrolled through photos from home. Hey, just make sure you love that rifle more than you love people, Parker had joked once. Because I swear you talk to it more. She'd shrugged, smiled thinly, and said, It listens better, which had gotten a few laughs and a mock wounded noise from Parker. But there was some truth in it. As the briefing broke up, Kova clapped Marsh on the shoulder and started issuing assignments in his gravelly voice. Reyes, you're re-security on the march up. Same deal as always. Eyes on the ridges. Stay 2 bounds back from the main element. Don't wander off to marry a boulder or anything. Yes, Sergeant, she said. On her way out, she passed the wall where a blown-up satellite image of the valley was pinned. It had been taken weeks ago, maybe months, and showed the valley floor unsullied by the crater field she'd seen in other places. The relay site on the ridge looked like a tiny dark fleck, barely visible. Outside, she checked her radio, flipping through the assigned frequencies: squad net, company net, fire support, the emergency guard channel. Each crackled to life with a different flavor of static and distant voices. Everything sounded as it should, noisy, but usable. Then, on a frequency that should have been quiet, she heard something else. It was short, only a second or two. A burst of encrypted chatter, high and fast, like a compressed whisper. Wrong modulation. Wrong rhythm. Not theirs. She frowned, thumb on the dial, and flipped back, listening. For a moment there was nothing, just the wind rattling the antenna on her pack. Then the basenet came through again, someone joking about space socks. Whatever she'd heard was gone. Lieutenant Marsh stepped out behind her. Problem, Corporal. Brief hit on 34, sir, she said. Didn't sound like us. Could be nothing. Skip or spillover from the other side of the border, maybe. Just weird. He considered that for all of 2 seconds, then shrugged. We're practically on the line. We get all sorts of junk echoing in the valley. We'll keep an ear on it. He gave her a quick, practiced smile. Appreciate you being switched on. It was the kind of answer she expected. Comforting enough to move on. Not strong enough to erase the itch between her shoulder blades. They stepped off an hour later, a thin file of figures moving out from the gate, breath pluming, boots squeaking in the cold. The maintenance team hauled cases of batteries and a ruggedized laptop on a small sled, ropes looped around their shoulders. The squad spread around them, weapons up, eyes scanning. The valley swallowed them gradually. The base faded behind a curve. In front, the terrain tightened, rock walls leaning in. Snow lay heavy on old scars, chunks of blasted stone, faint lines where trenches had once been. Once, this area had bristled with guns and sensors in another era's war. Now, officially, it was just a quiet border zone. Reyes walked re-security, as ordered, her rifle balanced in the pocket of her shoulder, eyes moving from the path behind them to the ridgelines above. Every so often she stooped to brush aside snow from some old piece of hardware, the edge of a rusted steel plate, a half-buried stake with faded paint. This place used to be serious business, Parker muttered when she pointed out one of the old firing positions. Now it's just a pretty hiking trail nobody advertises. Still serious to somebody, she said. He snorted. You see ghosts everywhere, Reyes. He thumped the side of his ammo drum affectionately. Relax. You'll jinx the snow. But as they moved deeper, she saw more, patterns that didn't fit with abandonment. Heavy track marks in the snow, wide and spaced just so. They ran roughly parallel to their planned route, then veered off toward a narrow bend where the walls drew in close. Fresh powder had fallen overnight, softening the impressions, but it hadn't been enough to erase their shape. Reyes slowed as they approached that bend. The rock walls here showed old blast marks, scars where charges had once bitten deep. Several of the filled-in positions sat on small shelves above the valley floor, long since collapsed and drifted over. See? Kova called back, following her gaze. Cold War junk. We've been through here a dozen times. Never even got a rock thrown at us. Tracks are fresh, Reyes said quietly. Too wide for our stuff. They run delivery sleds for logging on the other side. Locals cut corners. We're fine. Kova's tone made it clear that, in his world, that was the end of it. But as they pressed through the bottleneck, Reyes' eyes snagged on a half-buried marker stake near the rock. Unlike the others, its paint still showed a hint of bright color under the ice. Someone, sometime, had once wanted to remember exactly where this spot was. At the relay site on the ridge, the wind hit them full force. The ground was scoured nearly bare in spots, rock jutting out. The small mast and equipment box of the relay hunched behind a low wall of sandbags, half covered in wind-packed snow. Owens and the other techs got to work with practice motions, popping open panels, swapping battery packs, connecting a cable to their laptop. Data began to flow. Lines of text, timestamps, compressed images streaming across the screen. "Looks like the recorder's been busy," Owens said, raising his voice over the wind. "We've got a ton of RF hits logged. Movement, too. Lots of heavy metal going back and forth across the line the last couple weeks." "Heavy metal?" Marsh asked. "Tanks, APCs, big stuff. Patterns, too. Like they are rehearsing routes. This proves it. They've been shifting gear where they are not supposed to." Owens grinned, exhilarated despite the cold. "Command's gonna love this." Protocol said that when a unit serviced the relay, they also set a denial package in case someone tried to capture or destroy it later. Small charges to wipe the electronics. Maybe a mine to complicate any chase. Kova mentioned it offhand, already turning to check fields of fire. "We've got a spare claymore in the kit. Someone with nimble fingers go stick it on the trail as a parting gift." "I'll do it," Reyes said. Kova raised an eyebrow. "You planning to propose to it or something?" "It'll be neat," she said. "And I've got the best view for where it matters." "Fine. Don't overthink it." She took the satchel with the mine and the clacker, trudged back down from the ridge toward the bend. As she worked, kneeling in the snow, she wasn't in this valley anymore. In her mind, she was somewhere else, a narrow alleyway in a different war, years earlier. She was younger then, and her rifle had felt like something borrowed. The firefight had erupted without warning. Hostile fire from the windows, muzzle flashes she somehow could not make herself raise her weapon against. Her boots had been rooted to the ground while others moved, shouting, returning fire. It had only lasted seconds before a grenade bounced into their formation, rolled toward the team leader who had shoved her out of the way just as it detonated. She still woke some nights with the image of his outstretched arm, the way his eyes had looked not at the grenade, but at her. Never again, she had told herself afterward. Never again would she freeze. Out here in the cold, she shaped the future with her hands. She positioned the mine just off the main track, angling its face toward the open space where a vehicle's hull might pass, a small metal mouth waiting under the snow. She set the firing wires, tested the line with the clacker, and then disconnected it, coiling the wires neatly. They'd only arm it if they needed it. There was something oddly comforting about the ritual. Place, aim, cover, mark. She brushed a thin layer of powder back over the device, just enough, and then looked around as if committing the whole scene to memory. The way the rock on the left jutted, the shape of a twisted tree root on the right, the exact distance from a bend. "You'll remember this," she told herself. "If you need it." On their way back down from the relay, loaded now with hard drives and the lightness that came after a job well done, the squad plunged back into the valley. The sky had cleared, blue and open. No fresh snow yet. The world seemed still. Halfway to the bend, Phelan jerked his head, pressing one hand to his headset. "Getting something," he said. "It's weak, coming from Outpost Delta, I think." He twisted dials. Static surged, then thinned. A voice cut through, chopped by distance and interference. "Unusual jamming. Armor moving. Don't use the main." The transmission cut out mid-word. The squad stopped, boots creaking to a halt in the snow. Eyes turned to Marsh. "You think that's about us?" Parker asked. Marsh checked his watch, checked the sky. "Could be they're seeing something further north," he said. "We're on the clock. If we take the high contour, we miss the bird." He shrugged like he was counting costs only he could see. "We're almost through the valley. We stick to plan. Keep moving." Reyes stepped closer. "So, the tracks we saw earlier." "I know what we saw, Corporal," he said, more gently than his words. "If there's something nasty in the valley, it's moving, not sitting still. We'll be fine." Eyes sharp. He turned away, raising his hand in the signal to move out. Reyes looked back once, up toward the ridge, then down at the bend where the walls narrowed. Her gaze dipped to the snow that concealed her mind. She let her eyes rest there for a heartbeat. Then, too, trust something, she told herself. If not the plan, then the work you put in. She followed as the column moved on, her boots leaving narrow tracks that the wind immediately began to soften, the valley closing around them like the throat of some vast, patient animal. By midday, the valley had flattened into a rhythm. Crunch of boots, soft murmur of voices over the radio, the occasional crackle of ice falling from overburdened rocks. The sun sat high but weak, its light glinting off every surface until it hurt to look. Reyes walked rear security, every sense extended like feelers. The earlier heavy tracks had been swallowed by fresh wind-driven snow. If she hadn't seen them in the morning, she would never have known they'd been there. The walls rose on either side, steep and close enough that she could have thrown a rock from one side to the other with a bit of effort. Up on the ridges, the wind played tricks with the light. Glints flashed here and there, maybe ice, maybe glass, maybe nothing at all. Every time she raised her rifle and scanned, she found only the relentless white and jagged rock. She was about to chalk it up to nose when the earth in front of the point man exploded. The mortar shell hit just off the trail, a column of snow and debris punching upward, bodies silhouetted against it for a surreal, hanging moment before they were hurled backward. The sound slammed into Reyes a moment later, the sharp crack of the impact and the rolling rumble of the blast echoing off the walls. Contact, front. Mortars, front. Cova roared. Another round fell, this one behind them, sealing off the route they'd just used. The squad reflexively dropped to their knees or bellies, weapons swinging up. Owens and another tech sprawled in the snow, clinging to their sled as it skidded sideways. Machine gun fire raked down from the right-hand ridge, the first burst chewing into the snow just in front of the main element, the next dancing through their formation. Traces burned vivid lines in Reyes' peripheral vision. Reyes threw herself behind a bulge of rock, snow burning her cheeks where it scraped past. Her rifle came up of its own accord, reticle hunting for the source of the traces. "Phelan, get me fire support on those ridges." Ma shouted, voice pitched high with urgency rather than panic. "Smoke out! Smoke out!" White and gray smoke grenades arced through the air, hissing as they spewed clouds that began to blur the clean lines of the valley. Phelan slammed himself behind a stone, handset jammed against his A. "Viking Actual, this is," he began, and his words dissolved into that same stomach-turning hum Reyes had heard on the net before. The radio screamed back at him with an unbroken, warbling tone, like someone dragging a finger endlessly along the strings of a broken instrument. He yanked the handset away from his ear with a caress. "Net's jammed," he yelled. "I can't reach anyone." Another mortar whistled down, closer this time, slamming into the snow just ahead of their previous position. Someone screamed, a single, raw sound, then cut off abruptly. Reyes scanned, scope tracking along the right-hand ridge. There, burst from a machine gun dug into a low position halfway up the slope, muzzle flashing in rhythmic pulses. She exhaled and squeezed, sending a round at the gunner. The man flinched, dropped, the fire faltering, but someone else immediately shouldered the weapon and continued the arc. "They're in prepared positions," she realized aloud. "They've been here." On the left side of the valley, figures rose from what she'd thought were harmless snowdrifts. Camouflage cloth fell away, revealing infantry who had lain in wait in shallow pits. They brought rifles and light machine guns to bear, turning the valley floor into an L-shaped fire trap. The opening bursts were too precise to be luck. They hit where it hurt first. Phelan jerked once as rounds stitched across his back. He fell forward on the radio unit, headset askew, the handset buried in the snow beside his outstretched hand. The medic, Sorensen, sprinted toward him and made it 3 steps before bullets plucked at his chest and thighs, sending him tumbling. Reyes' world narrowed to sights and movements. She scrambled to Sorensen's side, hooked an arm under his plate carrier, and dragged him behind a boulder while rounds spanged off the rock overhead. His breathing was ragged, eyes wide. "Stay with me," she said, dropping her shoulder to keep him in place. She fired short, controlled bursts at the flashes on the ridgeline, aiming not to kill outright but to force heads down, to buy slivers of time. "This angle sucks," she thought bitterly. They had the height, the cover, the time to get their fields of fire exactly where they wanted them. The squad was bunched up in the valley like figures on a shooting range. Marsh tried to impose order on the chaos. "Smoke left. Fire and maneuver. Bravo team, you're bounding back." His commands cut through the air, and to the squad's credit, they responded, muscles moving before thoughts caught up. Smoke billowed, creating shifting gray veils that obscured both friend and foe. But the mortars adjusted with uncanny speed, shells walking backward and sideways, hemming them in. Every time a group of soldiers broke cover to move, another round fell uncomfortably close. The enemy fire shifted as if someone had their exact positions plotted and was calling corrections in real time. Whoever's running their fires knows exactly where we are. Another burst of machine gun fire shredded a piece of Cover's cover. He turned, shouting for Parker to bring the big gun up. Parker pivoted, dropped to a knee, and began to lay suppressive fire on the left-hand ridge. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of his weapon filled the valley. Then a single, sharp crack cut through the din, a different sound from the usual. Parker jerked, his weapon slewing sideways as a sniper's round punched into his helmet and out the other side, blood and fiberglass spraying. Reyes' stomach dropped. In the space of a minute, their radio, medic, and primary machine gun were down or compromised. The valley had become a textbook kill box, enemy fire pouring in from two sides, mortars sealing the exits. Through the growing haze of smoke, a darker shape materialized down valley. At first, she thought it was another trick of the light, a shadow cast wrong. Then the silhouette resolved into something solid and mechanical, the angular hull of a tank, low and squat, its barrel already angled roughly in their direction. "You have got to be kidding me," someone muttered. The tank crawled forward with terrible calm, each clank of its tracks somehow audible even over the gunfire. It moved into position just far enough back to sit hull down behind a slight rise, exposing only its turret and upper hull. Whoever was commanding this fight knew what they were doing. "Back! Back!" Marsh ordered. "We've got to get out of the valley." "Where?" Cover shouted back. "We're bracketed." The first tank round landed close enough to make the air itself slam into Reyes like a wall. The explosion tossed her sideways, snow blasting across her face, her ears going instantly deaf and then ringing with a high, piercing note. Her rifle slammed against the rock as she fell, and she felt and heard the sickening crack of the protective lens on her scope. She blinked, vision swimming, and pushed herself up. For a moment, everything was moving in slow pieces. Marsh lay twisted, a jagged chunk of rock where his chest had been. Part of the relay hard drive sled was on fire. Owens was screaming, clutching his arm, which hung at an angle it shouldn't. Kova, bleeding from a cut across his scalp, grabbed Reyes by the shoulder and dragged her back down. "You good?" he shouted, though she barely heard him through the ringing. She started, voice muffled to her own ears. "Scope's cracked. Still here. Good. You and Nadu. Left side. Cover." He pointed up at the left-hand wall, toward a steeper but potentially climbable route. "We're going to split. Half of us are going up that wall to try and flank those positions. The rest hold here as long as we can." Reyes glanced at the wall. It was steep, icy, dusted with loose snow, but not impossible. "This valley's a coffin if we stay," Kovas said. His face twisted briefly, whether from pain or from the weight of what he was about to say. She didn't know. They knew our route, our timings. Someone fed them our playbook, and they built this whole circus around it. Another mortar round slammed into the snow just beyond their position, showering them both with chunks of ice. Kova coughed, spat pink into the snow. "We don't beat this by playing the part they wrote for us. You understand?" She did. On some level, she understood more than she wanted to. Reyes, Nadu, one of the riflemen, slid to her side, eyes wild. "You still with us?" "Yeah," she said. "You two anchor this side," Kova ordered. "When we move, you lay it down. You hear me? Make them think we're all still here." He clapped her shoulder once, hard, then stumbled off to rally the climbers. They tried. Reyes and Nadu fired skyward, bursts at muzzle flashes, at any hint of movement. Under that cover, three figures began clawing up the left-hand wall, boots scratching for purchase, fingers digging into icy cracks. For a heartbeat, it looked like it might work. The enemy fire shifted, uncertain, as if recalculating priorities. Then a sniper on the right-hand ridge found his range. One by one, the climbers jerked and fell, their dark forms sliding down the slope in slow, helpless arcs, leaving red trails behind them. Reyes fired at where she'd seen the glint of the sniper's scope, her round chewing a chunk of rock away. But the sniper had already moved. Somewhere above, a faint buzzing grew into a distinct whine. Reyes craned her neck and saw it, a small drone, wobbling slightly in the crosswind, rising from behind a rock outcrop on the ridge. It hovered, then began to drift toward their position, nose nodding as its sensors searched. "Hell no," she muttered. She tracked it, adjusted for the sway of her own cover and the bob of the drone. On her first shot, she missed by inches. On the second, she caught one of the rotors. The tiny machine lurched, spun, and then pinwheeled downward, smashing into the snow and disappearing. For a few blessed seconds, the mortar fire stopped. The valley felt wider, the air a fraction more breathable. Then the ridgeline erupted again. Whoever was calling shots for the enemy had seen her muzzle flash. Bullets chewed the edge of her rock, showering her with powdered stone and snow. One round grazed her arm, hot under the fabric, making her bite back a shout. She slid down behind the rock, chest heaving. Nadir wasn't there anymore. She didn't know when he'd fallen. Kova crawled back toward her, trailing a smear of blood. He collapsed heavily at her side, one hand clutching at the front of her vest, pulling her close so she could hear him through the ringing in her ears. "Listen," he rasped. A dark stain spread from under his armor, soaking into his blouse. "This is done. They've got us in a box. Radios are dead. No one's coming." "Don't say that," she said automatically. But even as she said it, her eyes tracked the valley, taking in the scattered pockets of movement, men and women huddled behind inadequate cover, the growing number of still forms. There was no cohesion anymore. No squad. Just fragments. "We've been fed routes before," Kova coughed. "Patterns. Safe paths. Maybe someone upstairs got lazy. Maybe someone sold them. Doesn't matter now." He dragged in a breath that sounded like it had barbs. "What matters is what you do with what's left." Her throat tightened. "Sergeant, either you die here holding this rock with me," he said, eyes locking onto hers, "or you find a way around. You hear me? You find a way to break this cage. Make this mean something." Another tank shell landed, closer still, the blast wave slamming into their rock and showering them with chips. Kova flinched, coughed, a ribbon of blood trailing from his mouth. He kept his grip on her vest. "We don't have a unit anymore," he whispered. "We've got you and that rifle and whatever's left of your stubborn brain. That's it. That's the plan now." She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't enough, that no one person could undo what had been built here. But the moment she let herself think that, she saw the alley again, saw herself frozen while others moved. Not again. Kova's hand slackened. His eyes stayed on her, but the focus in them faded, his gaze drifting past her toward the bright slit of sky above. "Over them, not through them," he breathed. "Up and over, Reyes." His hand slipped from her vest, falling into the snow. She crouched there for a second, head bowed, bullets whining overhead. The world felt too loud and too quiet all at once. Then she looked up at the wall to her right. It was steeper than the left side. Less obvious. That meant it was also less watched. For now. The tank's engine revved again, the turret shifting. It had been waiting, patient, for the chaos to drive any survivors into the open. Now it began to edge forward, tracks grinding, closing the distance. If she stayed here, she would die with everyone else. If she climbed, she might die alone, halfway up, knocked loose by a lucky shot. Either way, the only path that offered even a sliver of a chance at changing the geometry of this fight led upward. Over them, not through them, she repeated under her breath. She slung her rifle, tightened the strap, and grabbed for the first handhold. The first few meters felt deceptively manageable, boots finding edges of rock under the snow, fingers curling into small crevices. Adrenaline carried her, made her light. Then the angle increased. The snow here lay thinner, scoured by the wind. Patches of ice gleamed beneath, treacherous and smooth. Loose chunks of stone awaited the unwary footstep, ready to roll out from under her and send her sliding. Reyes moved slowly, methodically, every step and grip deliberate. She kept 3 points of contact at all times, testing each hold before transferring her weight. Her rifle bounced gently against her back, tethered by the sling. The map Kova had shoved into her hand was tucked under her chest rig. A trio of smoke grenades knocked against her ribs with each motion. Below, the valley roared. Gunfire and shouts echoed up, distorted. Another tank round went off, the concussion climbing the wall like a physical thing and rattling her bones. She pressed herself tight to the rock when the shockwave hit, feeling it vibrate through her. Halfway up, a slip nearly ended her. Her left boot skidded on a thin film of ice, slicker than it looked. Her leg shot sideways. For a heart-stopping instant, her stomach lurched and the sky swung sickeningly as her body lost its line. Her right hand dug into a crack, fingers screaming as they bore the sudden weight. She flattened herself against the rock, chest heaving, boots scraping for new purchase. Snow slid past her face in a small cascade, pattering down into the valley. She hung there, breath rasping loud in her ears, and saw, unbidden, that alley again. That moment when she'd frozen, waiting for someone else to move, and how someone had paid for that hesitation with their life. Move, she whispered to herself. Move, even if it hurts. Move now. She gritted her teeth and inched her left boot back under her, toes probing until they found a small shelf. Her thighs burned as she pushed up, her right hand loosening just enough to slide higher to a new hold. One movement, then another, and the world became stable again. She didn't let herself look down. At a shallow ledge she paused, crouched in the relative shelter of a jutting rock. Her arms trembled from exertion and cold. She brought her rifle around, resting it carefully on the stone, and peered through her scope to take stock. The crack in the optic's protective lens turned the image into a spiderweb of tiny distortions. The reticle sat slightly canted. The blast earlier had knocked something out of true. At any meaningful distance, the shot would go wide. Perfect, she muttered. She stripped off her glove and used her bay fingers to pop the damaged cap fully free, letting it fall into the snow at her feet. The glass beneath was scratched but clear enough. She adjusted the turrets by feel, working them back and forth, trying to center the crosshairs again. She needed a reference point, something on the valley floor whose distance she knew well enough to correct off. Her eyes scanned until they settled on the bend where she'd planted the mine. She knew roughly how far it was from where she'd stood when she set it. She knew the angle and elevation changes. Using the milling in her reticle and muscle memory from countless range sessions, she dialed in an approximate correction. Not perfect, but better than guessing. She picked a rock near the bend, fired a single shot, and watched where the impact threw up snow, a little low, a little left. She made another adjustment. She couldn't afford many more shots for test firing, but she couldn't afford to miss when it counted, either. Below, voices floated up, harsh, clipped, carrying the cadence of command. They were speaking fast, but she could pick out enough words to understand. Search, ridge, sniper. They know you're up here. Of course they do. She reslung the rifle and continued the climb. The higher she went, the thinner the air felt, though she knew it was as much panic as altitude. Each breath burned a little. Her heart thudded loud enough that she half expected the enemy to hear it and triangulate off the sound alone. The noise from the valley diminished as she gained height, muffled by intervening rock. Explosions became more distant, like storms rumbling beyond hills. Up here, the dominant sounds were the wind and the small, intimate noises of her own body working. The rasp of fabric, the scratch of boot rubber on stone, the muttered curses when a hold crumbled. At one point, a gust whipped around the wall and slammed into her, carrying with it a veil of fine, stinging snow. It blinded her, turning the world into a featureless sheet of white. She clamped herself to the rock, forehead pressed against it, eyes squeezed shut. Visibility collapse, she thought distantly, brain still cataloging. No lines of sight, no way to be seen, either. When the gust eased and the snow settled, she opened her eyes cautiously. The world returned in fragments. A ridge here, a rock there, the faint smudge of smoke rising from a valley. She reached a narrow ledge just below the ridgeline, barely wide enough for her to belly crawl along. From here, she had a commanding view, not just of the valley floor, but of both ridges and the terrain beyond. It was like stepping behind the map in the briefing room and seeing it in 3 dimensions. She eased onto the ledge, hugging the rock face, and laid her rifle across it. Her fingers felt numb, but they still knew this motion, this ritual. She unlatched her remaining magazines and spread them within easy reach, bullets glinting dully. The red tape mag she slid into a front pouch, angled for the quickest possible draw. "Not yet," she murmured to it, as if it could hear. "You're last." Through the scope, the battlefield unfolded like a deadly puzzle. She saw the tank, hull down behind its rise, turret swiveling. She saw the machine gun nests on both ridges, dug into careful positions with overlapping fields of fire. She saw the mortar team tucked behind a fold of terrain, their tubes angled just so, their spotters standing a little apart with a tablet and binoculars. And she saw, nestled against a rocky outcrop further back, a camouflage truck bristling with antennas, cables running from its rear into the snow. A cluster of figures moved around it, one with a headset clamped over his ears, his hand flying as he marked on a map board. "That's your jammer," she thought. "That's your brain and your voice." She could see it all now, the geometry of the kill box laid bare, how the valley funneled them, how the fire patterns intertwined, how someone on that hillside, or someone looking through a screen from inside that truck, had watched them walk into it and started the timer. They'd built this, not haphazardly, not as an opportunistic strike, but as a deliberate trap, maybe as test, maybe as a message. Her fear was still there, coiled small in her gut. But around it, something else had formed, a cold, clear purpose. "You wanted a way to make this mean something, Sergeant," she thought. "Here it is." Down in the valley, the tank's engine note changed again, louder even from this distance. It began to roll forward, inching deeper into the trap it had helped spring. Her hand went to the pouch with a red-taped magazine, resting on it for a moment like a promise. "Soon," she whispered. Then she took a slow breath, settled the rifle, and began to choose which parts of the enemy's machine she would break first.